Hello everybody, what's up? You're listening to I Was Just Wondering with me, Tom Salmon. The show that dives into music, film and games, and everything else in between. My guest on this week's show is Erika Davis-Marsh, who wrote, directed and produced her latest award-winning short film, CODA. We jumped into Erika's film festival experience, how she worked with deaf actors and the deaf community to tell an authentic story centering on a child of deaf adults, and a decision to turn down a prestigious aeronautical scholarship to follow a lifelong passion for filmmaking and dance. So if you're running, stuck in a traffic jam, or sitting behind a desk at work, I hope you enjoy my interview with Erika. So you're on the short film festival circuit with your film CODA. How's it going so far?
It's going pretty well so fabilities. We premiered at Cleveland International and we won the Programmers Award there. And then we went on to New York to ReelAbilities, which is the largest disability festival. And our film deals with disability topics. And we won their award, the Founders Award there. And we've been at LA Shorts and we're going to Nashville. And so it's been going pretty well for us, I think.
And what's been the impact of winning the Programmers Award at the Cleveland International Film Festival and the Founders Award as well for the film's sort of profile?
I think it's helped. There's been a little bit of interest in terms of professionally because of that as well. But I think maybe the greater thing is that more festivals have reached out to us to look at that for their festival. And so we're getting kind of a wider audience, nationally and internationally because of that. And so I guess that's the biggest impact so far, is that more people are getting to see, short film, which doesn't have as many avenues as a full length feature to be watched.
I mean, in terms of festival programming, where CODA's been playing, genre-wise, and in terms of what block of short films has it been sort of playing before and after it?
So far, the ones that I've seen, they seem to be kind of programming it in groups that don't seem to have a real solid genre. It's not like, the sci-fi genre or something like that. It seems to be playing with both other dramas and other some short like comedy pieces. I will say it usually plays first or last. It's never in the middle. It's always either how they want to start out the program or how they want to finish the program, which is kind of nice.
In terms of the other films, have you seen any other films that are sort of dealing with sort of disabilities on the festival circuit? Or are you kind of like, from what you've seen, the kind of only one that's out there currently at the moment?
Well, obviously at the Disability Festival, ReelAbilities, that was all full of it. But so I know we're not the only one out there on the...
Oh, sorry, I should just say mainstream. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I will say there's not that many. And there's certainly not that many that don't sort of, like, our film is about, the deaf community but it's not really about being deaf. Does that make sense? It's not about overcoming deafness, or it's not about how that impedes or doesn't impede their life. It's really just about that the people have how deafness kind of just affects the people, and then the people live their life, right? So I've seen a lot of that for sure. And even when I do see some sort of disability thing, it tends to kind of focus on, for lack of a better term, kind of curing or like overcoming the disability. And I know from my friends who, my deaf friends and, things like that, that's the one thing that they really are tired of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They just want to see themselves as they are, which is just human beings going through good times and bad times.
I mean, what's the reaction been like from the deaf community so far?
So far, it's been really positive. We have a lot of deaf actors in our film, and when they came to see my screening, this is my thesis at USC. So when they came to see my screening that they did at the end of the year, it was really they were really moved, that they were portrayed. Kind of, the whole film was full of deaf people, and it was one thing, and it wasn't just one person, and it was about the whole community and things like that. And I think those are the things that they really enjoyed about it. I mean, they liked the film for the entertainment factor that they liked, but I think on a personal level, it kind of just touched them because, you got to see more than one side, more than one person. So it's so far been really good. And it feels like people on social media, when they get to see it or when they get to see about it, really want to see it if it's not in a location that they're at. So it's been really nice so far.
And just overall, I mean, I'd love to get your hot take as a sort of filmmaker on the recent popularity of, say, deaf stories or deaf characters in more mainstream films like The Quiet Place, Silence. Do you think attitudes towards sort of disability are changing?
I mean, I think the community, the filmmaking and entertainment community is definitely more open for sure. And they're certainly willing to take a look at something that feels unique. Like The Quiet Place was like a unique take on deafness or like how it fit into the story and things like that. But I will say we're still kind of, from what I can tell from, people who are trying to like break in either as actors or writers or, directors and things like that, that we're still a little bit, we're still kind of at the beginning of it, right? Because when we're just, when we pitch or when people pitch stories that don't, like I said, don't deal with just the disability, with just put them in the story. Yeah. A lot of times, I don't know, it's met with a little bit of like, yeah, but then what's unique about that story? And you're like, it's just, that's the kind of the whole point, I think, is that those that have other, challenges are trying to be seen sort of as not just defined by whatever that particular issue is. Just like a short man doesn't want to just be a short man. He's also a man, right? It doesn't want one defining thing in their life. So, I think it's always where it's a progression. I think they're definitely there. I think the hardest part about the disability community in unlike, say, something like say the African American community or whatever, or like the Asian community or something, even though there's a lot of differences, obviously, like in the Asian community, ultimately there's sort of some similarity, but it's a lot different to be deaf than it is to be in a wheelchair, than it is to be mentally impaired or have some sort of so it's very different. So it's an interesting thing because they try to band together as a community, and I think that gives them power everywhere, but also in the entertainment community to kind of demand certain things. So yes, definitely getting better, CJ Jones, who's in our film, was able to be in Baby Driver, and he's working on Avatar and things like that. So, there's definitely progress, but at the same time, one person, or one role thousands feels a little small, considering how many people there are out there that are deaf or blind or in a wheelchair or have something. I don't know. So I just hope that, everybody continues to like open up their own minds about like how people can be used, and it's a little harder. You do have to make accommodations. We had on our film, we had to have sign language interpreters. And if look what we had once that volunteered because we were a student film, but if that's somebody you have to pay, that's an expense. All productions are willing to add that expense. So I don't know, some both. There's always like hope, but I still think we have a long way to go.
I just wondered, and it's a bit sort of tangential, but I know in terms of sort of cancel culture, that small hardline groups and vocal online groups can be upset by, say, a filmmaker they seem as an outsider of their community, tackling, say, like a social issue that directly affects them. And I just wondered if you felt or seen any backlash online when you were sort of like pitching the film to people to convince them that not that you really should, because I really believe that, anybody can tell any story they so wish. But in terms of like your sort of like experience or dealing with that sort of deaf community sort of like prior to this, was there any sort of resistance that you felt sort of tackling this sort of subject matter?
So far, there hasn't been any resistance, but I will say I really, and my producer really, my main producer really thought about that quite a bit. So because we were, when I was writing the story, I was very aware. At first I kind of was writing a story that was more focused on a deaf character.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized I didn't want to step into that, where I was trying to tell a deaf person's story.
Yeah.
And so I decided to tell the hearing person's story, which is more similar to mine. My brother-in-law is CJ Jones, so I am around deaf
Okay.
and community as a hearing person. So I feel like I can relate to bits and pieces of that part of Alex's story. And that was kind of a conscious decision. And then when we were putting together the team, we reached out to deaf producer to, help us with that. Also just to make sure that we were, like that he read the story. His name's Javon Wetter. He went to AFI. He read the story. We chatted with him about, whether it felt authentic to him. He has a CODA child. So, we went back and forth. We went out to a lot of CODAs and interviewed them about their story and hard of hearing people, and interviewed them about their story and their feelings, and tried to really put as much, time into the background and our sense of that, because we were aware that there could be a backlash potentially, and that really the backlash, I think, is mostly because of two reasons. One, people don't do their research. They don't really invest themselves into the community and the people.
Yeah.
Or two, it's about them not being enough, right? There's just not enough stories. And so they see the one story and they have to comment on it because that's their only way to get their point of view out, that they want to be seen or they want to be heard or they want to be able to tell their stories. And so I get that frustration. So I don't take it personally. It hasn't really happened for us so far, but we're only at the beginning. So I guess it could, potentially happen. And, and I definitely think it's fine if people want to get their frustration out for not seeing themselves accurately. I think our film accurately represents a portion, a sliver of a population. It certainly doesn't represent everybody's story and everybody's point of view, as no film could.
Yeah.
We take it. So I'm kind of prepared for it. I don't want to be in some sort of conflict with people, but I'm prepared if somebody is. And I do think they have some points, if we wouldn't have cast authentically with deaf actors, those kinds of things. I mean, we did our very, very best to really honor the place, what the film was about, right?
Yeah.
The film was about a person, but it was a person who had these particular experiences growing up in a deaf family. And we really wanted those people to really be deaf and those experiences to really be real as could. And it helped. The actors who portrayed, all the deaf actors really gave us a lot of insight, gave me a lot of insight into even deeper than I already had as sort of like a periphery member of the greater community, I would be at events and, things like that with my family, but they could give us, their points of view. Interestingly enough, it's not just hearing people, in a deaf family, but also our main actor Ryan, who plays Josh, he is the only deaf member of a hearing family, and he felt similar to Alex's, sort of not in the opposite way, but not really being able to totally fit in with his family and feeling like a little adrift. So he was all on board for the story from the very get-go.
Right.
Ultimately, that's all we can ask, is that when our actors and our, we go out to, other members of the community and they're on board, then we just have to be like, okay, we're okay. We're honoring the community. We're honoring the people working on it. And we're doing our best to give an interesting story and also, an interesting point of view. A certain point of view. It's perhaps not every CODA's story, but it is some, and it is some people who are hard of hearing. And clearly Ryan, like I said, fit in the opposite way. So it's clearly a story that's out there and it's true. And that's what we're going for, just some version of truth out there. So.
And what was the creative spark that set you off on the journey towards writing and directing CODA?
It's a couple things. I used to be a dancer, so the dance part is always part of me. I used to work in musical theater, and so dance movies and dance in general has always been a part of me. And at some point, I had been one of the sparks, the kind of sign language mixing with dance kind of spark came from. I've been watching a musical play that they had that had been interpreted through sign language. Yeah. All the sort of dance elements that were supposed to, if you had watched it in English, it would have been a dance portion. And instead, they sort of stood there and just signed the lyrics or whatever. Yeah. And I was, that's just such a waste because sign language is so physical and dance is so physical. I just always thought that there could have been ways to sort of bring that together and incorporate the sign language more clearly into the dance. And so that kind of had been like running around in my mind for a while. And then, and in lots of different forms, I've kind of been thinking about a version of this. Yeah. Maybe 6 or 7 years, quite a while, actually. It's just sort of some version of it's been just like floating around in my brain in different ways. I think the other part, the kind of family story kind of just stems in general from, I really like a coming of age story. It's just a kind of story that I've always been drawn to, where somebody is taking that next step from sort of what their childhood was to what their adulthood will be, or they don't always have to be young though, some previous life to their new life or that thing. And so I was kind of floating around with that and my own kind of, I was at grad school. I was sort of floundering a little bit in terms of trying to figure out like who I was, what I was doing, why was I here? What was I trying to accomplish? Those kinds of things. And those all just kind of meshed into the story of, Alex, who's, I set in this dance world and I set also in sort of a version of my family world. Actually, because I wanted to give CJ another, an opportunity to work. I began writing this before he got Baby Driver or before he got Avatar. So those just happened to be happenstances in terms of our film, but also for him, So that's kind of where it is. I really wanted to tell us, a family story, about someone who just doesn't quite fit in and is working through what that means and how to live with a little bit of like dichotomy in your life. You're never going to be both. You're going to actually have to learn how to live with sort of uncertainty. Maybe.
Without giving any sort of spoilers away, I hope the dialogue scenes between Alex and Josh at the bar, I mean, it's pretty much sign language. And I just wanted to know, was there anything sort of like technical you were doing on the page to indicate that these scenes would just be signed?
On the written page, we set up a convention where if it was signed, it was in italics, basically. Right. So that's just from a screenwriter thing. Mm-hmm. It took me a minute, though, and a couple of suggestions from my professors before we got to that, because they were like, we're confused. Right. And that seemed to be the easiest way. So we just sort of set up anything you see in italics will be in sign language. In terms of how we got it into sign language, we did I wrote it obviously in English, and then we hired a deaf ASL master, and she put it and gave us, we worked with her on the translation for that into into ASL. Like she did her translation based on what she kind of interpreted, and then she and I talked about like the nuances, and then maybe it would change a little bit here or there, and then she taught it to all the actors, including the deaf actors. Because obviously a translation is a choice, right? A choice of how you're going to put it in this new language. So even though obviously the deaf actors that we were working with spoke American Sign Language, it wasn't on them. It wasn't their burden to have to translate it into American Sign Language, which I never really thought about too hard in terms of how much of a burden that is until I was talking to Ryan, who had worked for many seasons on the show Switched at Birth here in, I guess it was ABC Family here, or what it is anywhere else. Anyways, and he said, I'd get my pages and then I would have to work on the translation.
Really? Wow.
So, I know, so crazy. And so I think there may have been somebody who would watch it afterwards or something, but I'm not really sure. It sounded like for the most part, he would translate it himself. And then, and so he'd have to memorize the translation, make sure that, he didn't mess it up and things like that. I mean, I might be a little wrong, but it is his story. But that's the impression I got. And then for sure on auditions and things like that, right? They're always they're getting a lot of times pages in English and then having to translate it into American Sign Language themselves, which is kind of interesting and something I didn't really know. And to be honest, we didn't do great in our auditions with that. We did the same kind of thing. We're working off the same bias all hearing people we're kind of working off of.
Yeah.
And maybe it's also just sort of, an accepted, something accepted by the community. But it's interesting. If I ever do a show or something in sign language, I think I'll really make sure that the pages for the auditions are also, given to somebody with a translation, video translation. Because I think it's not really fair that they have to put the translation through themselves. Anyway, so that's how we got into American Sign Language. We worked with this ASL master named Margot Senek, and she did all the translations and then worked with the actors. And then if there was any sort of, discrepancy or whatever, she would make the final, if the actors wanted to do something else or whatever, based on their own sort of sense of it, she would make that final decision. I didn't make the final decision. We would discuss it. I let her be the final arbiter of the sort of languaging for that. And then on set, my producer, Kerrynton Jones, is fluent in sign language. And so she knew the translations, and she would just double check before we were shooting that everybody was on point and then, didn't have any questions. And then she'd watch some of the takes and things like that, especially for Kerrynton, who obviously learned sign language to play Alex. Yeah. So we just wanted to make sure that she, that all her sign language was never unreadable or, or like, something like that, right? So, I mean, that's true for everybody. There were a couple takes, even the native speakers, just like everybody, we can bumble a word here and there. Yeah. And if you don't language, you don't know that there's a stumble in the sign language. So it was great to have her there to be like, oh, you got to redo that. that didn't happen well.
I mean, you come from a musical theatre background, and having directed and choreographed the stage show Musical of Romance for UC Davis, I just wonder what your biggest takeaway from that experience was and how it informed the way that you approach the dance sequences.
That was the first major thing that I had directed. It kind of really put me solidly on this sort of directing path. Yeah. Before that, I'd sort of really thought of myself more as a performer. And I do enjoy performing, but that really set me down, how much I really felt like every actor I was performing through was an interesting thing. So I always just feel like, oh no, I'm getting to perform every role when it's so much more fun. But in terms of the dancing, I always want dance to be, especially in a show kind of situation, to be character based and through character, and to be sort of telling a portion of the story, probably more like the psychology of the story, or like the emotional take of the story.
Yeah.
And so when we work with Tice on these elements, he and I mean, I didn't choreograph this one. I certainly did not have the skill for this particular one. Level. We needed somebody like a super master like Tice Diorio. So we were blessed when he came on board. But so he and I sat, and I had written out sort of a dance description of kind of what I thought was sort of happening in the dance. This kind of the person starts out on stage by themselves and and things like that, and these sort of not like two separate sides of herself kind of coming together. And I'd written sort of this whole kind of thing of what I thought was happening. And then he looked at it, and we sort of talked about it, and then we had a song written. The final song was written for us. And so we worked with the songwriter as well to shape sort of the, timing and things like that. Yeah. But mostly I would say Tice and I, once we got the basic shape in there, we were always just trying to dial in on Alex's story and like where Alex would be sort of story-wise, even though it was a dance in each moment. Like, what was she feeling? How could we bring in more of the sign language? How can we bring in more of sort of the themes that the film is going for? Just all that kind of stuff. So obviously when I got to do, romance, I got to sort of do everything.
Right.
But also I was limited by my own ideas. So I really loved working with Tice because I had my ideas, he had his ideas, and we really got something, I think really unique and interesting because of kind of the melding together of sort of our best ideas. So yeah, that's kind of where I took it. On the good side, I guess Tice is used to working with people who don't know anything about dance. And so it's so nice to work with, a director or like another creator that can speak his language. So there was a shorthand that we could kind of go. I would sometimes just act out or, whatever, the thing I wanted to some degree, and he'd be like, got it.
I mean, again, no spoilers, but the end dance sequence is incredibly involved. It does incorporate sign language, like dancing and storytelling, almost like in a single movement. Or not almost, I mean, it does. There are moments where all these sort of three things, elements, are all being visually expressed in one sort of fluid motion. And I just wondered in terms of your storytelling, or even in the script, was that something that you did spoke about having sort of a document outside of that?
No, it was always in the script. It was, like I said, I'd written out where I thought the dancing pieces were and what I thought they were supposed to express or be about. There's another dance sequence earlier in sort of the middle of the film. Originally, that was actually at the beginning of the film. It sort of morphed its way into the middle of the film as we did it, as things do. But that one, too, I'd also written, I didn't write the moves down. Right. I didn't know what choreography was going to be. I just wrote down, sort of the feeling, the mood, what I wanted the choreography and the music to kind of portray or be a part of. And, some of it ended up sort of exactly like I put it, and some of it was, different. But it was always there, and it was always intentional. It was one of the things that, funnily enough, that probably only I, in my mind, kind of knew what I was going for, though. Right. To some, and it was up to me to kind of bring all the elements together, the music and the choreography and the cinematography and to some degree sort of the lighting design and things that we did. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I will say that is a moment that if you read the script, you wouldn't get you would get what I was going for, but you wouldn't see what we ultimately accomplished. And I think that's what directors are supposed to do, though. I think they're supposed to sort of have a vision. There's a script that's a document that you follow, and obviously the better the script is, the easier the job is, and the less kind of tricky elements, to deal with later. But ultimately, it kind of all the ideas get funneled through the director, and if you have your vision strong enough, I think they all just slot in like a weird little Jenga puzzle or something, and you're like, it stands, it works,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what I did, yeah. And some of my professors were not sure I could pull it off, but they didn't know my dance background and something. That. So, sometimes you just have to believe in your own self and then just, that's okay. I got it.
Just today, I was watching a current affairs program and a segment came on about disabled dating. I mean, that's something, it's not a big part of the movie, but I just kind of wondered in terms of moving forward, if you were going to do a feature film version of CODA, was that something that you were going to further explore in terms of the sort of stigmas and difficulties and realities of dating within the deaf community?
I think a feature version, or I think part of what you don't see but would start to happen had the story lasted longer. We were kind of a little bit aware of that, meaning, how much time has passed by, right?
Yeah.
If you start to sort of, date someone long term, right, then you can't hide all the little things about yourself. And maybe for just, for us just sort of like normatively abled kind of person, that's mostly you're just kind of hiding your own personality quirks and things like that. That for somebody else, you're maybe having to hide how difficult certain things are.
Yeah.
My sister, who's, married to CJ, there's just some things that he doesn't want to participate in because the experience isn't fun for him because, and they've had to work through that in their relationship, because obviously you want people you love to be around you and to enjoy the same things you do, but it's not always true. And I think more so than just normal, like, I just don't enjoy that because I don't enjoy that. There are access issues, that have to be addressed sometimes. And I think I think that's where I wish some of the stories, like I was talking about stories that are about like, it's not about overcoming sort of whatever your thing is, but I think acknowledging that there are, as you're going out in your world, acknowledging that there are that people are finding different challenges that are not yours. Those interesting things, like subtle character things, so to speak, that I think sort of mainstream movies, miss. You might miss the fact that, where wheelchairs are easily accessible or not easily accessible. I think you can find some great comedy in that. And I think the wheelchair community would also find some great comedy in those kinds of things. So it doesn't all have to be serious and like some sort of, teachable moment.
Yeah. So
yeah, I do think it'd be an interesting portion to, you would in a longer version, you would see more about some of those difficulties of access. Mostly I would say access, besides just your human beings being different people. I think it's access, what I would take for granted of being able to do, is not the same. If you look at our bar scenes, because we made it a deaf night, if you care, or if you're paying attention, or if you notice, the sounds of the bar are vastly different, right? There's not so much talking. There are performances going on, so there's some, there might be some like beats or whatever, just like when he's drumming or those kinds of things. But there doesn't have to be. And it doesn't mean that deaf people don't listen to music. They do, but they don't need it to feel like there's like energy pumping and a great time necessarily. The way a hearing bar would be like, oh, we need to like throw so much music on because and weirdly, the funny thing is in bars, it's so hard to communicate, but if you were a bar is way easier, except for the darkness. If it's really dark, then they have the same trouble we have when it's really loud, where you're like, what? I can't quite see that, what's happening. So it's an interesting thing and that's also why our bar scenes are a little lifted and light when, when it's the deaf night, because, the lights would be on. If you go to a big deaf event and it's nighttime, it's way brighter than a normal kind of ambiance kind of hearing event because they see, or they can't, there's no little dark alcoves where, it's an interesting thing. I've seen so many, I've been to so many parties and it goes from daylight to nighttime and you might turn on a few lights maybe, but you want to keep the kind of, you want to keep that kind of vibe going or whatever. But the deaf ones, it's like all the lights come on. It's bright.
I also feel it's kind of important for people with sort of disabilities also to be seen as objects of desire for other people as well. And also, as you're talking about the differences between somebody who's like normatively able and somebody who suffers from a disability, but how they communicate like love and affection between them, because that's part of one of the sort of social issues that this news program was raising, the idea that these people want to be felt, desired, loved, and like lusted after, the same that I guess like universally everybody kind of wants to feel that within their lives, to live a sort of rich and fulfilled life. But also I think what's interesting about that is how people with different disabilities communicate love and affection between each other. And I think that's something that can be an issue for audiences, or maybe something they're not, it's just not something that I'm not used to sort of like seeing. But I definitely feel that that's something that I myself would like to see more of, to see a more richer sort of like universal human experience of that kind of thing as well. I don't know if that makes sort of sense at all.
Yeah, I completely agree. I do think we are run by our own sort of biases, of what is sort of what we have been told is sort of attractive and kind of things, and who that is and what they look like and all those kinds of things, definitely. And that's kind of maybe where, when you were asking me a little bit earlier about like Hollywood, is it any better? And it's like, kind of, because they will put, say, a deaf character in a certain kind of role, but you're right, they're very unlikely to put them in the like leading romantic role, easily, right? It's going to be, and that's kind of an easier one because they could be very handsome, you know what I mean? Or very attractive, beautiful woman or something like that. They just don't hear. Whereas there's obviously other things that people could have that make them physically or visually look less like what we would normally consider desirable. And it's an interesting thing. And I do think there's something in the desire and stuff, but I will say we also bumped into, which is slightly in the same thing, when we were doing sort of test screenings, we would bump into people who would misinterpret things that were happening in the film, basically because they were seeing it because they only knew their hearing biases. Right. So things that were deaf were not necessarily considered desirable. Sort of one of the elements is Alex's sort of attachment to her family, and her family is deaf. And so she elevates her desires of deafness and things like that because of that experience. And people hearing, especially men who were hearing, oddly enough, were they just were like, that doesn't seem to make sense. And I think it's the same thing. It's what we think is desirable or something that you should want, and it wasn't making sense of like, why would she sort of want to be deaf, Yeah. And it was always our cases, my point of view. And like when we were, my producer and I were chatting with, the test audience and stuff, it was the case of just like, well, she wants to be like her family, and her family has to be deaf, and deaf is not, anything to be ashamed of. So why wouldn't she want to be a part of that community? Why wouldn't we all want to be a part of whatever community we associate ourselves with? And we're always disappointed if we can't be full members for whatever reason. I sometimes kind of, when I'm explaining it to somebody, I say it's very similar to, a family comes over from, like, say, Iran or something like that, and their culture and the parents are so deeply established in that culture, and the kid but could never go back to Iran and be accepted as a full member, right? They will always be an American part of them because that's where they grew up, and some of their thought processes are American, and they just will never 100% fit in there either. They will always sort of be a person who travels between, and there's so many. This particular case that we went with was this this deaf kind of divide. There's so many of these divides, so to speak, where we feel like there's something we can't obtain that we want. And I think the path to healing is to realize that, you're never going to be a full member of it, but you are still a member of it, and you still are worthy and spin and wanted and all things, right? And it's okay. There is a way to be, like you said, desired, so to speak, right? And for who you are, even though who you are isn't who everyone else is, either way, it's an interesting thing. I do really think our own biases of what is good, what is desirable, what is normal are so huge, and we don't even realize sometimes that we're working on this real programming that just you have to be confronted with it. And that's, I hope CODA does a little bit of that, like just slightly tips you into going, hey, think about this for just a quick second, and the more taps you get, I think the more open you are to really kind of delving into more of that. Through CODA kind of brought us in contact with Easter Seals, that community there and that organization. And so we went to an Easter Seals event, and they also have a film. We didn't show, but we went to it. My producer and I went to a film competition where they have it's all, at least a disabled person needs to be involved into it, and they don't any kind of disability. They don't. Easter Seals is an organization that kind of promotes disability awareness and that kind of thing. Anyways, it was really interesting because we talked with a bunch of people, and we sort of talked a little bit about what you're discussing in terms of, they're just people trying to get a job, have a family, have a life. You know what I mean? They want everybody wants the exact same thing, and they want it to be as easy as possible. And that's the hard part, right? Because it's not as easy as possible. That's not going to be their life. And so it's an interesting thing. And when you have sort of the easy as possible life, like sort of I do, it's an interesting thing that I have to kind of just like go, you have to be kind of, I don't mean like grateful or whatever, but you got to go, okay, so I need to put myself in their shoes a few more times because I need to really open myself up to that. So I'm not just blindly going through life, unaware that I'm judging so many things. It's just without awareness. You just have to kind of like keep bumping into stuff, keep bumping into points of view, keep kind of loose and open that way, I think.
I don't think it's no bad thing. I mean, in terms of our experience, we all have a certain, it's not blinkered, but our experiences are our own experience. And until you run into other sort of like other people's sort of like experience and make you more aware of your own, this sort of transference of like, oh, okay, I'm seeing something different, and it's making me more aware and more perhaps thoughtful, maybe, I don't know, about our own, the benefits and drawbacks within our own lives, which is always sort of interesting.
And it's kind of something I try to do with my films, at least they don't always have to be about the same topic or whatever, but I just think it's always push a little farther than just push out a little bit farther. It's sort of one of the great privileges of making a film, is that it can be seen by a lot of people and can kind of reach out to people that have no access. There's not one deaf person in their circle of friends or community that they know of, and you can kind of, just sort of like I said, just sort of tap on it, or like that program that you saw that kind of opened your mind. I feel like that's what that's a great thing that entertainment can do. That's what we do best. On the other side, we have to make some dollars, so sometimes things, and then I'm not saying they're bad, I'm just saying we go back to what is normative, what is already done, you know what I mean? Because that's easy, and it doesn't push too many boundaries. So, sometimes you can only push so many boundaries at any one time. I do think, especially now that we're seeing so many more, filmmakers out there of such varying backgrounds, that the points of view and the way they're going to explore different things, not just their own background, but how they see other people that are, it's just going to be amazing. I think we're a little bit heading towards, it feels like sometimes the opposite, as everything turns into Disney and things like, which I love Disney, nothing wrong with Disney, but as everything sort of turns more like global, at the same time, I really think, with the filmmakers I saw, that I was to school with, and the countries they were coming from, and the differences in their point of view and things like that, and the ability for films to just travel around the world so easily. It's just the internet, and as long as there's an access point, you can watch it. I just really think we're going to start seeing something maybe more akin to what we saw in the 70s, where we saw these really distinctive points of view starting to come out.
Yeah.
Really just sort of doing their own kind of crazy, weird thing. And it really sort of finding audiences, because audiences is sort of, I think, obviously not every audience, but I think audiences are getting a little bored of seeing some of the stuff that they've seen before. They want to, there's certain things that people love. People love a romance, but does it have to be the exact same romance you've seen a million times? Or can it have a little flavor to it that's, interesting and kind of opens your mind to a different culture, or a different point of view, or a different way romance could work out?
I guess it's not the stock that a beautiful woman who's blind becomes sighted again.
Yeah, right.
And then falls in, like that old cliche, suddenly she's cured. It's no, she's blind for the whole of the movie. That's just who she is.
Most blind people that I've seen, and I've only met a few, but they usually have some sort of damage to their eyes, so their eyes are not those beautiful, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is something to their gaze that's different, and it looks different, and things like that, and also, it's so interesting. That's why I will say I don't really love seeing, people that walk in wheelchairs, partially because I've seen people in wheelchairs, and the damage that gravity does to their spine, pushing on them for sitting for however many years they've been sitting, makes their body look a certain way that, let's just be real, no person with a spine not damaged could look, so it just feels wrong to me these days. I more and more just want, as much authentic casting as I can find. It just really feels like the best way to do it. CODA's a little bit driven by that, but even just to have, you have your doctor doesn't have to be, hearing or sighted or standing up or any of those things, right? Could be many more things. So, I'd love to see more of those smaller roles and smaller things also go to more and more diversity, however that means. Just more and more people, just more and more versions of people, less and less the same version. I love a beautiful person too, but for them, but you get a little tired. You get I don't think that beautiful person is having that life as much as the fantasy version is, but the reality is that's a different person's life. Let's see that person live that life.
Well, I just wondered in terms of your own sort of background, that I know that you won a prestigious Air Force aeronautical engineering scholarship, but you turned that down. And I just wonder, what was the sort of tipping point in your life that made you choose a career path in the arts? And were your parents and friends supportive of that decision?
Funny thing is, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be sort of something scientific. At first, I thought I wanted to be a paleontologist because I really liked dinosaurs. But then that quickly kind of morphed into something like an astronomer or an astronaut or something like that, something with the stars. And I was really good at math. And just goes to show you, art and math can go together. You can be good at both. You can choose whichever one you want, but it's not one or the other necessarily. So that's kind of where I went, and I was heading that way, but I was also dancing simultaneously, and I was doing theater and things like that. And somewhere in my senior year of high school, I just started like having small panic attacks about what my life would be or whatever. And I just didn't think I was making the right choice to go towards to the aeronautical engineering and things like that. Although I still love, going to like the science museums a lot and looking at in Los Angeles, there's a space shuttle that you can go look at, and I just go all the time, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I just felt like the dance, the singing, the kind of artistic expression was calling to me stronger. I felt like it was the very unsafe choice, and that the engineering was the very safe choice. And I'm sure I could have been good at it, and I'm sure I would have had a good life, no doubt. But I don't know. It was just sort of an instinctual thing. And maybe it was partially because I just I've always felt a little I'm a little bit like Alex is in the film to some, it's like seeking something, not sure what, just always seeking something that doesn't feel quite, it was that. And I just was like, I just need to explore that. I just need to explore what it feels like to be not in control, which wasn't me as a teenager. I was super like valedictorian, like studied a lot. I was that person. And I just kind of jumped in and went for it. And I don't know. I guess that was it. I just suddenly felt that was what I needed to take my life and explore, was sort of this uncertainty instead of the certainty. And kind of that's what all my films are probably about. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to analyze myself, but they're always a little bit about a person who is definitely not sure where they're going.
I mean, that's a pretty universal experience, I guess.
So it really is. I don't think I'll go wrong. I think people can pretty much go for that all the time. So and my family, luckily, they're super supportive. My parents have always been super supportive. They've always just sort of, they've been those kind of dream parents that you sort of want, where they're just sort of like, whatever makes you happy. Of course, my dad was always worried about how I make a living and things like that. But, typical kind of things. But he never stopped me, really. He would just sort of caution me, I guess. But then I'd jump off some cliff somewhere, and he'd be like, cool, you landed in the river, awesome, and I'm happy for you, and it's good. I just wanted to make sure that you knew you were jumping off a cliff first. And I was like, yep, I did, thanks, Dad. So unusual. I'm sure a lot of parents would be a lot more freaked out, but somehow my parents were always kind of like, well, you'll find your way. You're smart enough. You'll either succeed at this, or you'll turn around and you'll come back. But whatever, you'll find a way. So they were always very they always believed in me, maybe more than I believed in myself. Sometimes it was always a nice thing. It was always a nice thing.
So I was just sort of wondering, as a sort of female filmmaker, and part of me doesn't like asking this question, because when you put the sort of female in front of the filmmaker, it's like we're all filmmakers, no matter what our sort of like gender is. But I do, from interviewing other female filmmakers, that their experience of working in the film industry has been different. How have you sort of navigated the industry, and have you obviously I don't want to go into sort of like uncomfortable territory if there has been sort of transgressions and stuff there. But I just wondered, in terms of you and your peer group, how have you found moving forward through the movie industry, and have you maybe come into these sort of issues or problems, or people that kind of have?
There's a couple things that I noticed. One, there's a tendency for people to want women stories still from me, like stories about women, which is fine. I like that. I love stories about women. I'm not against that kind of story, but I'm open to directing a story with like a man protagonist, that kind of thing. I still feel like that's a little bit there, that kind of shows up. Like if you pitch something that's a little like in the territory of a little bit like male skewing territory, like something like sci-fi or some sort of like action based thing. That's not so much that they're not interested in, but you really have to prove that you've done it before, that this is your thing, that you're like you know what I mean? And I think it's harder. I think you just have to prove a lot more. And that's the hardest part, is like you have to sort of, I feel like even from USC, some of my kind of cohort counterparts done well so far. Those have all been the ones that I know that have done like exceedingly well, have sort of fit into that sort of stereotypical thing. They're a white man. They have had a story about a white man, like boys kind of something, where the boys like kind of a little a little socially awkward and trying to find love. And that feels, and this is a talented filmmaker, and I don't want to say that, anything, but I'm just saying the stories that are appealing to, it's not about him and his filmmaking. I'm just saying what the industry is looking for is still somewhat the thing that they've seen before, with just the tiniest little twist. And that's still sort of a little frustrating from that point of view. I do think, this is my own point of view. I don't know this has anything to do with the industry. I don't even know if it's 100% true, but this is my own opinion. Women have had to work so hard to prove themselves coming all the way up forever and all kinds of things, that there's a sense that when they build their teams, that they're like who their team, their DP, and there's, all these teams of people, that they're always looking for the best one, which sounds fine, except for that's a very stressful thing to do when you're in the beginning of your career, of having to make the best one, having to put the best team, having like all that kind of stuff. And I feel like my male counterparts don't feel that pressure of, if this one doesn't go, then I may never get a chance again. So they use their friends to help them out and things like that and all that stuff. And then that whole group of men all get so many more experiences and things like that. And they kind of bond in a much more organic way. And I feel like some of that bonding that's kind of socially built in kind of carries them out into the industry a little bit different. And not that women are not supportive. I'm not trying to say that, they are, but they have had to build they have had to like attract teams to them. Just a little harder. It doesn't feel as free and easy. And so it feels like the women I know haven't made as many things, haven't, helped everybody else make as many things. You know what I mean? And so I feel like when you walk out into the industry, you're still kind of pushing a little hard. And we all know pushing, or you need something, it never comes to you. It's just like some sort of energetic thing. And so I think in general, the men walk out and have sort of this idea that like it will all work out, because it has been working out pretty good for them overall. Not perfect. They're not, some better than others. There's always these hierarchies. It's just a generalization. But and then I feel like you walk out and you're a woman and you go, I will make this happen for me. It's a different way to enter the industry. And I think because of that, the industry responds to us differently, a little bit. And then I do think, obviously, if you're an attractive actress or whatever, you are in a dangerous place. Let's just be real. There are still those people out there,
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a woman who's powerful, you will still be referred to by all those typical ways that people refer to powerful women. You know what I mean? It's not considered an asset to have strong opinions and not back down from them. Where it's still an asset for a male director to throw a tantrum and be like, I must have my vision. And the female director that does that, may not see a film for another bit of time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I still think that's out there, and I still have had my when I've had to defend some of my ideas. I feel stronger than seen my counterparts have to defend them. I've had to make sure I've gone on to sets. I did a web series for a friend of mine, and I just guest directed, so I didn't know the team until I came in. And I definitely was, by the technical people, I was challenged slightly. Right. I don't know if it would have been different for somebody else. All I know is what happened for me. And I was, I get it. This is your set from the point of view of you've been shooting the rest of these episodes. But, it still like, I do know this stuff too, though. Do know what a camera lens will do, and I know which one I want, and I know the difference between sticks and a handheld thing, and I know why I want it. So anyways, just a little bit of that. I do think it's 100% better. I feel like the generation of women right now also have overall come up in a better place. And so even people that are a little bit younger than me, I went to grad school, but there's some people that were undergrad. So they're, 22, 3, that. Right. And those women, they're fairly fearless, and more power to them. They are just going out there, and they don't have as many of the restrictions put on them kind of by the society. And thank God, because they're just pushing out the boundaries, and where they're sometimes go, oh, I wish I was as brave as that particular person, because she really just doesn't see that there's a problem. And that's what I was saying about what I think men have sort of, kind of have had for a long time, is just sort of that sense of like, it's okay. I can go out there and be powerful, and I can fail, and it was okay, and I'll pick back up, and something else will happen for me. And that, I think, is what's going to change the industry, is that those, it's just being flooded and flooded and flooded right now with 22-year-olds who are assistants at this point, right? They're people's assist, but they will not be assistants forever. They will be the executives, and it'll be a much more amazing place. So I have a lot of hope. I do have a lot of hope.
So there you have it. I had a great time chatting with Erika. Please do like and subscribe to the show on SoundCloud and YouTube, and drop a comment or two. And you can get in touch with me at the Salmoning01 on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Tom, and I'll catch up with you next episode.